Here's a guy who's very self-assured about his gotcha questions for atheists.
If there is no God, why is there anything at all?
Well, this question seems to me to assume that the default state of reality is nothingness. I think this is an unwarranted assumption. If God exists, why does he exist instead of not existing? If he can just exist by necessity without needing a cause, why can't the universe exist by necessity without needing a cause?
This is another angle on where did the universe come from without a creator? If you want to say, well, the Big Bang, great. I go for Big Bang. But God lit the fuse. God set it all in motion. Where did your Big Bang come from?
It didn't come at all. The Big Bang is just the earliest point in time and in the universe's expansion. And there was never a time when the universe wasn't expanding. If there was never a time when that expansion wasn't happening, then I see no need to explain where it came from. It's always been here. Folks who ask this question sometimes assume an outdated Aristotelian idea of motion. They seem to think, as Aristotle did, that if something is moving, it must have been at rest at some point, and something must have set it in motion. Since Newton, we have understood that this is not the case. Motion need not be contingent.
By the way, don't bother with the where did God come from argument. God, by definition, is self-existent and pre-existed this universe. In other words, when God created the universe, he created time along with it. There was no before or after at that point.
Then it's nonsensical to say that he pre-existed it, isn't it? And again, if God can exist by necessity, why can't the universe?
Where is the evidence that life could have begun without intelligent interference?
The evidence is that there is no known source of intelligence other than biological life. Life, as best we can tell, is a prerequisite for intelligence.
How can matter existing and moving randomly, without any volition, without any will or anything else, become what's necessary for life and then become alive?
Well, first of all, matter doesn't move randomly. It moves according to the non-random laws of physics and processes of chemistry. A simple, broad definition of life is self-replicating chains of nucleic acids. I see no reason why such molecules can't form by purely chemical means. Why would intelligence need to get involved?
How can evolution explain features of irreducible complexity apart from intelligent intervention?
Every example of irreducible complexity I've ever seen cited seems to be predicated on the same unwarranted assumption. Apologists who bring them up always seem to assume that if a biological feature or process can't work as it does if parts are missing, then it can't perform any function at all. Many of the examples of supposed irreducible complexity are debunked by simply pointing out that if you take parts away from some biological feature, while it may not be able to do what it currently does, it can still perform a variety of other advantageous functions. A common example of a supposedly irreducible feature that folks brought up to Darwin was lungs. How could an organism evolve lungs before it breathes air, people would ask. It would drown if lungs evolved while it still lived underwater, but lungs don't look like they first evolved to breathe air. It looks like they are modified swim bladders. So even before lungs could perform the function of breathing, they could still perform an advantageous function.
And what I'm talking about is features that we see in creatures today, such as wings. Wings on birds. Birds supposedly evolved from reptiles, and those wings before this evolution were legs, forelimbs, arms, whatever you might want to call that. And you need to be able to say and demonstrate that each stage that was necessary in the steps of evolving these wings was a benefit to that creature all along the way. In other words, this creature whose legs began to be wings would have become less worthwhile as legs. How is he more survivable than the creature who has experienced no change and has perfectly good legs?
Well, bird wings did not evolve directly from legs. Birds evolved from theropods. These were bipedal dinosaurs whose front limbs were more analogous to arms than to legs. The mutation of their front limbs into wings didn't impede their function as legs because they weren't being used as legs in the first place.
How can the evolutionary model be true since the fossil record clearly shows most major groups emerging at the same time? I'd like you to Google Cambrian explosion. And see what I'm talking about there.
The Cambrian explosion shows a lot of major groups emerging relatively suddenly, but that's not the same thing as at the same time. The explosion occurred over a period of up to 25 million years.
Stephen Jay Gould, who was the foremost proponent of evolution for years and years, now deceased, said that the dirty little secret of evolutionists was that the fossil record does not show gradual change. He's right, it doesn't. And yet we have been told since Darwin that gradual change is what happened. Very small steps, they're not in the fossil record.
Well, it obviously shows gradual change. If it didn't, all the same fossils would be found in all the same geological strata. Gould obviously wasn't claiming that. What Gould believed was that the fossil record doesn't show smooth change. There seem to be periods of lots of change, followed by periods of stability. Nothing about that implies intelligent intervention.
Darwinism and the evolutionary model is now becoming like the old story of the emperor's new clothes. People fear to publicly question it, but in private they do. And many of them have gone ahead and stepped out and put their names on lists of people who publicly declare that the Darwinian model does not account for what we see in nature today. So don't bother with telling me that all of those people are kooks. You know, we're talking to PhD level scientists from, you name it, universities and such. And, you know, deal with arguments, don't deal with your opinions on people's personalities and personal worth.
You should take your own advice about dealing with arguments instead of bringing up people's PhDs as though that grants their opinions validity. Arguments from authority are also a form of ad hominem.
If there is no objective standard of right or wrong, which was furnished by the Creator, how can anything be wrong?
Anything can be wrong by subjective standards.
If man is the result of mere chance, a combination of atoms that just happened, then why is there any value in life whatsoever?
Something has value insofar as someone values it. Life has value because we value it.
On what objective truth do you base your morality, if any?
Why do I need to base my morality on an objective truth?
Which is the logically defensible position that matter eternally existed, or else it came into existence all by itself for no reason.
Well, I don't believe in either of those scenarios, so I don't see the point of choosing between them.
And then it arranged itself into extraordinarily complex living systems, including not only mechanisms but huge amounts of information that's needed for life to function. This being against everything that we've ever observed in science, where things moved towards disorder left on their own, as opposed to moving towards more order.
Things move toward net disorder. They don't always move toward absolute disorder. The total amount of order always goes down in the grand scheme of things, but we still observe relatively tiny isolated increases in order. Get a jar of muddy water and watch the sedimentation process. Over time, sediment layers will order themselves according to particle density. That's a tiny increase in order in what is, on the whole, still an entropic process. Do you believe that God had to step in to magically sort the denser particles from the less dense ones? Or can you see as well as I can that order can increase without the intervention of intelligence?
Or the other position that an eternal self-existing being, definition of God, infinite intelligence, infinite power, created life and the information systems necessary for life to exist all at once. This is only a problem if you have a preconceived belief that God does not exist.
There are actually a lot of problems with it, like how something exists before a spatiotemporal universe does, or how an immaterial being could create matter, or interact with matter, or how such a being could be intelligent given that intelligence is a process carried out by matter, or how it could provide information when information is a pattern into which matter is arranged. What would it mean for information or intelligence to exist without matter?
What place do preconceptions have in scientific inquiry?
As little as possible. The whole point of science is to infer post-conceptions from observations. Preconceptions get in the way of that.
Natural selection requires that something be alive and reproducing for it to for natural selection to operate. It cannot be alive and reproducing without a huge amount of DNA operating the life functions inside the cell.
Not true. Chains of nucleotides don't even need a cell to reproduce and be subject to mutation and natural selection. RNA can reproduce itself.
So what came first? The code in the DNA or the organism that depends on it for life?
The RNA, a precursor of DNA, actually came first.
How can natural selection produce something that is a prerequisite for natural selection to operate?
It didn't. The cell and DNA are not prerequisites of natural selection. It was chemistry that got the ball rolling.
If scientists almost totally accept that a signal from outer space containing information that could be interpreted as a string of prime numbers would be proof of extraterrestrial intelligence, why would they not accept that the information coding in the nucleus of the simplest cells, DNA, which is equivalent to the information in a full set of Encyclopedia Britannica, was the result of intelligence?
Because we know of no way to derive a set of prime numbers without intelligence. We don't see any patterns in the information in DNA that can't be formed from mutation and natural selection. There's nothing in there analogous to a string of prime numbers. Information is not automatically a sign of intelligence. Information is just non-randomness. The arrangement of the sediment in the jar I showed earlier contains information about the respective densities of the particles in the jar. No intelligence was necessary to produce this information.
What if God is real, as described in the Bible, and you have to stand before Him and give an account for your life? Do you have a list of reasons already for why you never accepted Him? Under close scrutiny, will those reasons betray the fact that you don't want to believe, and will stick with anything that sounds good rather than look too closely?
No, because the main reason I don't believe in a God is that I don't know how to believe in an entity whose every description and definition is incomprehensible to me.
If I answered all your objections to your satisfaction, would you submit your life to Jesus or recognize God as your creator?
The former, no, but the latter, yes. If you showed me to my satisfaction who my creator is, then it would be easy to accept that as a matter of fact. However, the mere fact that something created me doesn't automatically make my conscience any easier to defy. If submitting to Jesus means following the rules in the Bible that are intolerable to my conscience, then doing so would simply be beyond my psychological capacity.
If you say no, you must acknowledge that your objections are just a smokescreen. The real problem is that you don't want to submit or be accountable to rules given by a Creator God.
It's entirely possible to both acknowledge the existence of a God and still refuse to submit to one. My disbelief in a God is not a product of my refusal to submit, because I see no reason why I can't both believe in a God and still refuse to submit to Him at the same time. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.